I don't know if you already seen your book.
I have, yeah. David sent me a couple of copies. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not. I like the cover. It's
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
It's very,
put it on Michelangelo, the creation of man, right?
I was thinking on that exactly, like the Capilla Sixtina, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I was just working on my talk I'm going to give at the bookstore, and I'm going to start out by mentioning that the original nickname for MDMA was not ecstasy or Molly, it was Adam.
Yeah.
And back in the 80s when it was being used by therapists. So that's a really great cover, The Creation of Adam, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, because ecstasy came later, no? In the end of the 80s, I think, in Europe maybe.
Yeah, I think it was in Dallas, Texas. There was a big scene with in bars and clubs before the rave movement started. And I think that's when they started, the people selling it in Dallas came up with the word ecstasy.
So it was more like a marketing strategy, yeah? Like a branding,
right.
Yeah?
Right. I mean, who doesn't want ecstasy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to thank you in the behalf of the team, of the whole team of Beckley Med for your time, for your work, for your book also. Beckley Med, the foundation I'm representing right now, is it comes from the idea originally, the Beckley Foundation, whom founder Amanda Felding,
right.
You interviewed for your book also. Is in
I've met her. I've met her a few times, and I interviewed her for the book.
Yeah. How was your impression of Amanda? What can you tell us about Amanda Fielding?
Well, she's a real pioneer in this field, and she has a very interesting, backstory of her adventures, in the 1960s. So she's a bit older than me. I caught the tail end of that era of the 60s and 70s. But no, she's a real pioneer, and she's been working in this area for so long. So she's an important player. Yeah.
It's curious because she comes from this scene of LSD and lysergic acid that is funny because all the medicines, all the drugs that are being used in the psychedelic medicine, LSD is not anymore in the scene. It's like it's the mushrooms, it's the MDMA, the ketamine. Yeah. But what happened? What do you think the LSD is not so welcome in this area?
There is some work being done, a little bit of work being done with LSD, but not very much. You're right. I think there's a couple reasons for that. The first one is, there's a practical reason for it. If you're doing therapy, with a patient, an LSD trip can go on for 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
So whereas a mushroom or psilocybin journey could be maybe 6.
Yeah.
So there's a practical reason where it just takes less time, especially if you have 2 therapists working, which they often do in the clinical trials. At least they have 2 therapists working with the research subject. So there's that, and also LSD is just infamous.
Yeah.
It immediately brings to mind the 60s, at least in the United States. Yeah. It brings to mind the 60s and hippies and all the controversy around psychedelics with the counterculture in the 1960s, and the backlash against that led to the crackdown on all psychedelics, and including LSD. So I think the word LSD has a lot of cultural baggage that maybe not so much now, but early on, like in this, say, 10 or 20 years ago, when groups like MAPS or Hefter were just starting to try to get research money for this work, they were trying to avoid that past, that cultural baggage that LSD had. So most people have never heard of psilocybin. I mean, the average person, and or even MDMA. So I think there's just it's less controversial in people's minds, and also LSD is very, very powerful drug. So I think you have to be more careful using LSD, whether you're doing it therapeutically, spiritually, recreationally. It's not addictive. It's not physically dangerous, but there are psychological dangers. Some of which I experienced myself as a young person. I read about that in one of my books. So.
Do you think that after 50 years that I have, by the way, I was born in 71, the very same year than the prohibition with Nixon of the psychedelics and the rest of the drugs. After 50 years, the image, the figure of Timothy Leary, for instance, it has been more negative than positive in the discovery of these potent, powerful drugs.
Yeah. Well, Leary, I mean, I think a lot of people have forgotten about Leary. I mean, younger people, I don't even know if younger people have heard of Timothy Leary, but back in the 60s and 70s and into the 1980s, he was a very controversial character. And, he was a brilliant psychologist, researcher, but, he became associated with this crusade to turn on the world. And he really left science didn't really leave Leary. Leary left science. I mean, Leary wanted a bigger stage. He really was leading a social movement, him and Richard Alpert, later Ram Dass, of course. So, his legacy is very mixed. It's very mixed. I think a lot of people unfairly blame him for everything, for the whole backlash and the war on drugs. It's not that simple, it's really not. I mean, there are a lot of other reasons for that the government cracked down on these drugs. It had nothing to do with Timothy Leary. But he was a brilliant guy, very colorful character. And I write about him in my book, The Harvard Psychedelic Club. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I haven't read it.
It's actually it's an interesting book because I write it a bit more like a narrative nonfiction style. It's kind of reads like a novel, although it's all nonfiction. But so I tell the story of what happened in detail with Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and two other men who crossed paths at Harvard in the fall of 1960. And they really set the stage for the revolution in the 1960s around the counterculture, psychedelics, and all of that.
I think I read in your book. I'm not sure because I'm reading so much about psychedelics lately, but this counsel about maybe don't have psychedelics when you are too young, and maybe this is the bad image of the disaster of LSD. That was like very young people having these powerful drugs so young, but when you are much older, it's kind of easier. It's how when your personality is set up. Yeah,
exactly. That's a very good point. I was just actually writing about my talk next week. I'm going to give in Barcelona. And I'm going to mention that because there's another woman, Sasha and Shulgin. Sasha Shulgin is a famous chemist, and I interviewed his wife, his widow, in the book, and that's one of the things that she said. Not just with LSD, but also with MDMA. I mean, she thinks that. She learned the hard way that it's not a good idea to take too much MDMA or take it too often. Maybe even in some ways more dangerous in terms of physically dangerous than LSD. But I think that's true. I mean, what a high dose psychedelic journey does is it can kind of blow away the ego. It can ego dissolution or transcendence, depending on how you want to look at it. And it's important for you to have a sense of yourself as a person before you blow that away and open up to a higher sense of self, a bigger sense of self. And I experienced this myself. I I don't write about it in the latest book so much, but in the end of Harvard Psychedelic Club, I talk about my own story. As an 18-year-old,
Wow.
taking, having some wonderful experiences on LSD, but then having a really bad experience and really having a kind of a psychotic break. And I had a lot of trouble for about a month or several months. I had a very difficult time. I think I came out saner than I went in, but I was very scared. I thought I had permanently damaged my brain.
Wow.
I didn't know what had happened. I had flashbacks. I had LSD flashbacks, which I used to think was just government anti-drug propaganda, but no, they can happen. They happen to me.
It happens to me also, yeah.
So I wish, one of the reasons I think this work now is so important is I wish I had had a guide or a therapist to help me get through that, because often a bad trip can be the most healing trip if you have someone to help you and reassure you. And I didn't have that, as a young 18-year-old who I thought I knew everything already, and that was LSD. Those were high dose LSD trips.
For me, the fact that having these plants, for instance, or the LSD, the same LSD in a context of ceremonial context with a guide, for me it's like going to the mountains with a Sherpa, someone who has traveled all the way, take you by the hand, and it's a safe place, But because if not, you are like outdoors with no tools to understand your own mind. I think this is the very big difference, in an ayahuasca ceremony or a mushroom ceremony and having mushrooms in your own, for instance.
Context, intention, set and setting, as Larry and Alpert said, set and setting, your mindset and the physical setting is very important. And the intention, the music, the whole thing, the whole way it's structured. There's a big debate going on now in California. There are people who are, maybe they're in favor of the medicalization of psychedelics, but they actually also want to have them legalized for recreational use.
Sure.
And so there's actually a backlash against the medical model in a much of the psychedelic community, probably there in Europe too. I don't know, but there's a slogan. People say, "Keep psychedelics weird." Which is a play on another expression. But anyway, so it's an interesting time now, especially in the United States, because you have three prongs. You have the clinical trials, the government-approved clinical trials sponsored by MAPS and other organizations to reclassify psilocybin and MDMA so they can be legally used by therapists. Of course, they've been used for decades, underground therapists. So that's the medical model. Then there are the legalization, decriminalization campaigns. And we've had several cities in the US and one state have basically decriminalized psychedelics and legalized psychedelic therapy, or Oregon has done that. And it's spreading across the country. So there's the legalization campaign. And then there are people who, in the United States, we have this idea of religious freedom in the Constitution, which you can also call cognitive freedom, which Leary was very much, that was his whole thing. We have the right to alter our consciousness in any way we want. So you have the people that are arguing from a religious freedom point of view in the United States. So there's three different ways that the people are approaching this.
I don't think. Do you think it's fair to establish this big difference between medical and recreational? Because from a point of view, recreational is about also the well-being. So the well-being is health. Because you are enjoying doesn't mean that it's not in a point medical. It's not. No. What do you think of this?
No, my personal opinion about this is yes to all of the above. Yes to everything. I mean, I don't think, obviously the war on drugs has failed miserably, whether it's with psychedelics or opioids. We have a huge opioid epidemic right now in the United States. I mean, in San Francisco, many more people are dying of that than ever died of COVID. But no, I think people should have the right. I believe in cognitive freedom. I think if you're not harming anyone and you're doing it in a safe way, you're not taking LSD and driving your car or something, I think people should have the right to explore their consciousness in any way they want. I think they should be careful. I think there should be education. People should learn how to do this safely, and also be sure they know the dose and the quality of the drugs they're taking. But no, it shouldn't be an either or. But in the so-called psychedelic community, there's a lot of infighting right now.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny. People thought, what's going to stop this trend? It was going to be the government cracking down, or the media turning on it and writing negative stories about. I think the main danger is within the psychedelic community. The arguing within the psychedelic community is very intense, and it's unnecessary in my opinion, because yes, you can have responsible recreational use for people that want that, and you can have a therapy for people that want that. You can have spiritual religious groups for people that want that. All of the above, I think, have value.
I think here in Europe, at least my friends there in Barcelona, what they are afraid is that the medicalization of these drugs, of psychedelics, could lead to the use exclusively in an hospitality, in a medical environment. So only the doctors are allowed to give these medicines, and not the shamans, or not a group of friends, for instance, just the doctor or the psychiatrist. So we are, in this point, we will lose the ceremonial way of working with plants, for instance.
No, there's a big question about who the gatekeepers should be, or whether there should even be any gatekeepers. That's a big question. And on the other hand, there are spiritual groups and recreational users doing this now, even though it's illegal. So, that's not going to change. The same thing happened with marijuana. First there was medical marijuana, then there was recreational marijuana, but there's still a lot of people either growing their own marijuana or buying underground marijuana because it's cheaper than in the dispensaries. So it's the same thing. No matter what they do with psychedelics, there's going to be an underground. There's going to be people doing whatever they want, however they want to do it. But it's just good for people to have the option, the choice. Because I do think, like I said before, I think people should be careful when they use these substances.
Since you wrote your book, because your book is published now in Spain, but it's being published, I think, in 2017 there in the States.
4 years,
4 years ago, many things have changed. There's been this huge pandemic worldwide, and the results, one of the consequences, terrible consequences of the pandemic, for instance, is the growth of depression, anxiety, unemployment, social consequences. Also, we are seeing, as you say before, the opioid crisis there in the States, in America. We see the images here in YouTube, and San Francisco, also New England. So the situation, I think, is in mental health is critical there. What is the role of psychedelics in this whole crisis scenario?
Well, I think there is a worsening mental health crisis in America, and a lot of it, I think, is because of the pandemic. People were so isolated and so anxious. I experienced that myself. Even getting ready to go on this trip, to get on an airplane for the first time. I was a newspaper reporter. I used to fly around the world, and at the drop of a hat, go into some dangerous situations. Now I'm very nervous. I'm very anxious about getting on a plane and wearing a mask. I'm experiencing it myself. The anxiety of it. So I think a lot of people are going through that, and I think it contributed to the opioid epidemic. I think, and so I think these drugs, especially psilocybin and ketamine, with depression can be very effective treatments. So if there are more people suffering from depression and anxiety, I think this is one treatment that's available, should be available to them. You know, although it's important to say that it's not for everyone. I mean, psychedelic drugs are not for everyone. Psychedelic therapy is not for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, for some people, traditional antidepressants work, or talk therapy works, you know. For others, treatment-resistant depression, psychedelics can be a great tool to help people.
Yeah. In your book, for instance, you recall your experience with ketamine. I like to ask you, why did you, I know already, but you can tell us why did you take, and how was the effects on you, on your mind, on your being after this treatment?
Yeah, well, I kind of, I stumbled across ketamine by accident, really. I mean, the story was I was doing another book, actually, another book that never really got published, but it wasn't really about psychedelics, but I was interviewing this doctor in Hawaii, on Maui, who I write about in the book, who he actually was Ram Dass's doctor. He just happened to be Ram Dass's doctor, who lived in Maui. And I was talking about my book, The Harvard Psychedelic Club, and we got to talking about psychedelic therapy. And I was talking about my own situation where I've suffered from depression, and I've, taken traditional antidepressants. And he mentioned, have you heard about ketamine? And I said, yeah, isn't that kind of like a party drug? Or, I thought of it as a party drug. And he said, no, this was like, this is quite a few years ago. This was, I don't know, 6 or 7, 8 years ago. And he said, no, it can be very effective for depression, especially for people that are seriously depressed, like suicidal, which is not my situation. But anyway, he said, would you like to try it? And I said, let me think about it. And I thought about it for a day. I came back and he gave me an injection. So it was, intravenous injection. And it was interesting because I hadn't taken any mind-altering substances for quite a few years. I stopped taking all drugs except double espresso was the strongest drug I took for quite a few years. Anyway, so I hadn't really, gotten high like that for quite a while. And it was an amazing experience. It was, especially the first time, because it was my first time and it was injected. So it was stronger. And it was basically just sort of, the experience was like sort of blasting off into a whole other realm of consciousness, like a pure kind of energy of being. I was really outside of my small self, my ego, my monkey mind, that's always going, and just a very peaceful, it was very frightening at first because it was so fast. It was just, he said, count down from 10. And by the time I got to 5, I was in a whole other dimension. It was actually a bit like 5-MeO-DMT, which I did later for the book. Similar in some ways. Anyway, I just felt a lot of peace and tranquility, and but then I came back down, and I think ketamine can be a great tool for depression, although it provides temporary relief, but what doesn't? So do antidepressants, So, but I eventually, so then a few years later, I met a doctor named Phil Wolfson, who I write about in the book, who's done a lot of work with ketamine, and he's written a book about ketamine. And I started doing the ketamine lozenges every week or two, a session, which has allowed me to get off antidepressants. So I haven't been on antidepressants for, I don't know, at least 5 or 10 years now. So it's been very helpful for me. It's not for everyone. And the way I do it is not recommended unless you're kind of an experienced psychonaut, able to handle it yourself. It's not something most doctors won't allow the patient to do this unsupervised. But if your doctor trusts, in the United States at least, it's legal. That's the other thing about ketamine. It's not Schedule 1. So I get it from a pharmacy. I get these lozenges from a pharmacy, and you know exactly the dose, the right dose that works for you. And you learn how to explore that territory and learn from it. And for me, it's been very helpful. But like, again, it's not for everyone. It's probably not for most people.
Would you describe it like a scary experience or a spiritual experience or a scary spiritual experience?
It's been scary a few times, but normally with the lozenges, which is a subtler, it's a gentler experience than an injection. What normally happens, I have headphones, you know, and eye shades, and the whole experience lasts about an hour. You know, maybe 20 minutes. You're in that zone. What I tend to feel is it reminds me of the thing about depression is life doesn't have meaning. The things that used to give you meaning, there's this meaninglessness that can overtake, and negativity, which I can experience. So with the ketamine, it kind of lifts me out of that, and it kind of reminds me of how my life has meaning and how things fit together in my life. So it's a reminder that everything is okay. You know, and it's and I often feel gratitude. I feel kind of love and gratitude. And the trick is to remember that and to try to remember that in your everyday life, you know. And for instance, it might remind me how music is important, because music is such a big part of the experience with this psychedelic therapy. And you know, I play guitar, and there's my guitar there. Right? I play guitar, and so it reminds me to, you know, pick up my guitar. I mean, to, you know, or to go out in nature. It reminds me to do the things that make me feel good, that bring me joy. You know, so but you know, on the other hand, it's temporary. It wears off. It wears off. So
like you need to do it once, and I think it lasts for maybe a few weeks, 2 months or something. I mean, the effects in your mood.
For me, I don't know. I do it. I do this maybe once every week or two. That's probably more than most people. I don't know. It's not microdosing, but it's the lozenges, which is a gentler way of doing it. But some people can do it once and maybe they're fine forever, or 6 months. Same thing with psilocybin therapy or MDMA. Everyone's different. Everyone's different.
I've done psilocybin recently, and I quit smoking. Absolutely. One season. I wasn't smoking that much, but it works very well. But suddenly it's like, I don't need this shit anymore.
No, I write about that in the book. There's a chapter, maybe you remember that. There's Matthew Johnson, one of the researchers at Johns Hopkins, has done work with psilocybin and tobacco. He just got, actually, this is news. He just got a big government grant to do more work on tobacco and anti-smoking with psilocybin therapy. So it's really the first time the U.S. government, has given a big grant for this kind of work. So that's significant. That because for the last 30 years, this has all been privately funded. The research has been privately funded. So finally, the government is realizing. I mean, the government has a huge problem, not just with tobacco addiction, but with PTSD with soldiers, American soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, we just ended the war in Afghanistan, but the war is continuing in the minds of many soldiers. And it's a huge problem with. More American soldiers die from suicide than from war, and it's been that way for quite a while. So the government is also, the Veterans Administration, and they're finally realizing that, yes, psychedelic therapy can help our veterans, our wounded warriors. That's why the first chapter in the new book is about one of these guys. And it makes sense for the government to allow this treatment, in the sense that the expenses, that the burden in the expenses in healthcare, for instance, for smokers or for drinkers,
are so huge. It happens in Spain, so makes sense. If I quit smoking and 1 million person quit smokes, really the problems that they have to expense in the near future for treating my health is a big savings.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So how do you think it worked? I mean, why were you able to stop smoking from one psilocybin trip?
Because of the intention, absolutely. Because when I was there, I felt like I could connect not with my lungs but with my heart. And suddenly my heart said like, okay, you are not doing well, because I'm a sportman, I swim a lot, I'm a good shape, but I'm a smoker. I was a smoker. So my heart spoke to me and say, don't do it. Take care of me, because you just have one heart. And suddenly it's like an insight, a powerful insight.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. That's how people talk about it. And people talk about this almost like a conversion, almost like a religious conversion in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's what I did for many years as a journalist. I wrote about religion and spirituality, so that's one reason I got interested in the psychedelics, because so many people, it really is a spiritual kind of insight. Spiritual / psychological insight.
Absolutely. You said before that many people don't know yet about psilocybin. They know about LSD because of this the 60s and all this Timothy Leary and this stuff. But actually, the funny thing is, I think this week the cover of Newsweek is about rooms.
I saw that.
Psilocybin, and also we've seen this last week here in Spain, where we are seeing this area of it's called 9 Perfect Strangers. Maybe you've seen it.
I started watching it last night, actually.
Well, that's interesting.
I watched the first 2 episodes last night.
I finished it already, and it's funny because it's about psilocybin. Actually, it's about everything you shouldn't do in a psilocybin treatment, because it's crazy. Yeah,
I haven't got to that part yet, but
you will. We can talk when you come back, when you come to Spain, because it's very interesting. But suddenly it's becoming like mainstream. Yeah, the psychedelics and the psilocybin in special.
Yeah. The media. It's I am part of the media, the so-called mainstream media. At least I used to be. And the media coverage has been really interesting. It's been mostly very positive the last 10 years. I keep waiting for the media to turn. That's what the media does. The media, we build things up as wonderful, and then we knock them down. Whether it's like Harvey Weinstein or whatever it is, I mean, that's what we do. But so far, it's been pretty positive, partly because the clinical trials have been very promising results. So, that's what happened in the 60s. I mean, you go back and look at the media reporting about LSD in the 50s. It was very positive until the early 60s, and Timothy Leary is partly responsible for that. Interesting part of that is that Henry Luce, who was the chairman of the Time Life Corporation, so Time Magazine, Life Magazine, which was like, Facebook and Google, combined in power back then. He and his wife were turned on to LSD by Gerald Hurd, who I write about this in the Harvard in the Distilled Spirits, my second of the 3 books. And so Henry Luce, the head of this big media corporation, had very positive experiences, and that filtered down. So there was so some of the early reporting in Time and Life was very positive, and that shifted as soon as psychedelics became associated with the counterculture, the new left, the anti-war movement, all of that. Then the mainstream media kind of shifted.
Well, it's a question of time of the media shift their view, their approach in the very moment that something happens, like an accident or a bad practice. I think that's the reason we have to do irresponsible work right now. All the people that are involved in the psychedelic, do it seriously, with the science behind, with no crazy stuff, with no promises, absurd promises to the people, but doing like the right way. Yeah.
Right, and that's why some people in the research community are not in favor of legalization or decriminalization for recreational use, because they're afraid it's going to be exactly what happened in the '60s. It's going to be a repeat of that.
Yeah. Sure. Don, I'd like to ask you, what are you working in now? Are you writing another book? Are you still interested in psychedelics? Are you using, if I can ask you, psychedelics right now?
Yeah, I'm on LSD right now. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Well, actually, I got a little, to be honest with you, I got a little tired of writing about it. I mean, I wrote 3 books.
Yeah.
Harvard Psychedelic Club, Distilled Spirits, and the new book. And, I did a lot of magazine articles. And so I felt like I'd said everything I have to say about it as a journalist and as a human being. But so I started another book, which I've self-published, which is kind of nothing to do with psychedelics. It's a kind of ancestral memoir about my family, and it's called Running from Religion. Which I've just, I'm still looking for a publisher for it. But I've self-published it. It's really a kind of a private project in some ways, but it's on my website. If people are interested, you can read the first 6 chapters of it.
Sure.
So I for a year or two during COVID, or the whole COVID shutdown, I worked on that. But I'm getting back into writing, some magazine articles about psychedelics again, mainly because there's so much interest that people are asking me to. So, I am doing some more writing. I don't have any plans for another book on psychedelics. There's so many books coming out. I mean, the last thing we need is another book about psychedelics, I think.
Also, psychedelics are for experience. It's like meditation. It's not about reading about meditation. It's a lot about doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. But I'm very excited about the book coming out in Spanish.
Yeah.
And my wife and I are looking forward to this trip and meeting you all. And my other books, like Harvard Psychedelic Club, came out in Czech and Korean, but
really.
Yeah, which is interesting, but not Spanish. So it's my first book. It's my first book to be translated into Spanish. So
wow. Well, we will talk with David, because he's the one who published his Ediciones La Llave. As you probably know, this is the editorial project of Mr. Claudio Naranjo, a very known psychiatrist. They are also in California, and very well known and remember here in Spain and in Chile and everywhere.
Yeah. No, I actually went back and I actually met Claudio a couple times briefly. And I had some friends, some older friends who were very much into the early psychedelic scene and the psychedelic therapy movement, with Claudio, Leo Zeff, Sasha Shulgin, all that. I was not. My friend was very much interested in it, and I met some of these people like at a party. I didn't experience it myself in a therapeutic context back then. But I went back and looked at Claudio Naranjo's book about MDA or MDMA, the healing journey. And I'm gonna talk about that in my talk.
Nice.
Because he was very ahead of his time. He was a real pioneer. So I'm going to talk about that in my talk next week. So
actually, Claudio wrote this book. Well, it wasn't a book, but it was like a scientific paper about ayahuasca in the 50s, talking about he started to analyze how the ayahuasca worked. He used this word that is telepathine. I don't know if you know this. Telepathine. Telepathina. Like the main component, the active component of ayahuasca, he called it, he did call telepathine, and it was in the 50s. But the book was published like 5 or 6 years ago with all the work he did like 50 years ago. So really, he's a pioneer.
Yeah, yeah, and he was also a pioneer with MDMA and MDA before
MDA,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I had a small group of friends, and we experimented. It was somewhere between recreational, spiritual, and therapeutic. It was all the above. But we had some wonderful experiences as a group with MDA originally, and then later with MDMA. And that's when I first got interested in his work, Claudio's work, and I read that book. It was 50 years ago that it came out, The Healing Journey.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. By the way, is still working there, SLN? Is the SLN group active?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that was the, I wrote a lot about SLN. Like, so I loved to go there. It was such a beautiful place on the California coast, Big Sur, which is a very near and dear to my heart, that whole area. I love that area. They're still, they of course, they shut down during COVID, but they're just starting to reopen, I think. It's funny because some of the early work with psychedelics was at Esalen, but then later in the 60s, Michael Murphy, one of the founders of Esalen, he wasn't very sympathetic to psychedelics. So they sort of stopped, at least publicly, talking about that for many years at Esalen. But it's starting to come back. They've had a few symposiums, a few seminars. Where they're at least talking about it again.
Good, excellent. Don, thanks a lot for your time. We are really looking forward. You're coming. You are your wife here in Spain in 1 week. We're preparing a really nice event there in Barcelona. So I wish you have a really safe and nice flight all the way to Europe. And I'm looking forward to meet you in person.
Yeah, hopefully we can get on the plane with the. We still have to do a COVID test, and it's a little tricky to do it in time, but we're working on it right now. So, God and COVID willing, we'll be there.
Okay, thanks a lot for your book and for your time, and see you in Barcelona in a way.
Okay, adios.
Ciao, ciao, bye bye.
Ciao.